Hello friends, I'm Michael Kingswood. I write fiction for fun and profit. Before we get to today's show, we have to do one thing real quick, and that's a little spot from our sponsor. Fortunately enough, our sponsor is me. In a world of valor and magic, two soldiers flee from their past. An isolated mountain town suffers under the heel of a vicious band of brigands. An offer of redemption for the one, salvation for the other, but not without great risk to both. Action and adventure await in Glimmer Vale, the first book of the Glimmer Vale Chronicles. Get your copy today, wherever great books are sold. Hello friends, well it is Saturday. Welcome back to Story Saturday. Yay! We are having fun here on the channel, where on Saturdays we read stories that I wrote so that you can enjoy them and decide that, man, I like this writer, I should buy his books. That's the whole purpose. Fun and money. And we have recently been going through stories that I wrote last year as part of my 2023 project, which was 52 stories in 2023. I crushed that project, actually wrote far more than my plan, and got out 5 collections of short work that were put out via Kickstarter campaigns, and it was awesome. We are starting Volume 3 now with a military science fiction story called Whitley's Havoc Makers. It's Space Navy, because that's what I know. I drove submarines for the U.S. Navy for 20 years, so, kind of have some familiarity with naval stuff, and so that's what I'm writing, at least in this story. And it's a fun little story that I think you'll like. Even if you don't like it, it's awesome because I wrote it, and you like me. So, sit back, relax, we'll have a little fun here, and we'll talk to you on the backside. Hope you like it. Band battle stations. Set condition zebra throughout the ship. The announcement carried over the 1MC speakers into space and echoed through the implants in Travis's ears. There was a microsecond or so delay between the two transmissions, or so the techies said. Shouldn't have been enough to be noticeable, they said. But every time the announcing circuits on board ICS Thomas Whitley said anything, Travis felt like he was hearing echoes in a little cave. At first it had been disconcerting, but after his first few weeks on board he'd gotten used to it, except for the alarms. Even now the alarms still made him cringe. And sure enough, as the 13 pulsating tones of the ship's general alarm sounded immediately after the Chief of the Watch's voice, he felt like his head was inside a bell being rung. All around him in the crew's mess, people were rising from their tables and hastening to deposit their trays and the remnants of their interrupted meals into the reclamation receptacles at the end of the food line. Travis waited the 20 seconds or so for the alarm to finish sounding before he rose to do the same, taking an extra couple swallows of scrambled eggs, washed down with maple syrup as he did so. He didn't trust himself not to trip over his own feet while the alarm was sounding. The alarm ended, and Travis rose from the knurled plastic of the seat he had been occupying. As he reached his feet, the Chief of the Watch repeated, "Man battle stations. Set condition zebra throughout the ship." Half of his fellow crewmen who had been taking their breakfast had already left the mess. The remainder were filing out the 2 exits from the space, located on the port and starboard bulkheads, respectively. Moving quickly but orderly, good military precision, not the flight of a mob. He moved past the dozen or so tables covered by black naga hide that was embossed with the ship's emblem in the center of each 10-person seating that separated his former spot from the reclamation bins, and ducked, by force of habit, beneath one white-painted bit of piping that protruded down farther than the others that routed around the overhead into space. Pipes and cable runs were everywhere on the ship, and Travis's shipmates most of the time paid them no mind. He didn't have that luxury. He was the tallest man on the ship, and he had learned to stoop and duck even before he learned how to ignore the subtle echoes of the voice transmissions over the announcing circuits. The food line was made of brushed chrome, like probably every serving area on every ship or cheap diner for the last 700 years or more. The crewmen behind the line were dressed in white smocks over top their regulation navy blue coveralls that also served as pressure suits should the hull be breached. As Travis came to the bins at the end of the line, he saw the cooks moving rapidly to stow their gear and throw the leftovers into the mass reclamation bins behind the line. They moved in a cacophony of practiced grace, each one seeing to his assigned duties, just as Travis knew others were doing all over the ship in their individual workspaces, each one adding to the defense of the whole. But on a couple faces he saw worry, bordering on fear. Travis glanced to the collar of each man who quailed, seeking out his rank device, and as he expected, none of them bore the chevron of a petty officer. None had been on space duty more than a year or two. They probably had only ever seen battle stations during a drill, and drills never happened during mealtime, everybody knew that. Travis mouthed silent prayers for each of the fearful men he saw on his way to the bins at the end of the line, but his prayers failed beneath the scent of the first of the bins. Bacon. So much bacon. He looked down at it, and all thought of piety, of asking God to help his shipmates, fled beneath pangs in his belly over the tragic waste of it all. So much gone and so little enjoyment. A lurching in his belly shoved his reverie aside, and he looked toward the nearest exit. He shouldn't have felt that change in the ship's acceleration. Normally, the grav plates in the decks were more than enough to counteract whatever maneuvers the officers saw fit to inflict onto her. But he felt that one. Travis swallowed and stopped lollygagging. He dumped the remains of his meal into the first bin, then his tray in the second, and then he hurried to the port side exit, now clear of any traffic. He hurried to port after exiting, following the O1 level forward athwart ship's passage, past the ship's library to forward, where he had spent many an off-watch hour studying to get ahead on classes he would be taking once he left the service in 2 years. Then he turned left when he reached the portside passageway. The throng of fellow shipmates making their way to battle stations was less now, since he had waited, but still a half a dozen hurried down the passage ahead of him, moving aft. They passed the rubbish stores room, then the rubbish processing room, then the hindmost guy ahead of Travis stopped as he stepped over a raised combing in the passageway. There were similar combings every 3 or 4 meters along every passageway on the ship, housing airtight doors. Travis knew immediately what the fellow was about to do, and called out for him to wait, but he either didn't hear or it didn't register, and he slapped the bulkhead to his right as he passed through the combing. The airtight door slid shut with a solid-sounding hiss and then a thunk, and Travis slowed to a halt in front of it. All the passageways on the Whitley were painted white on the bulkheads, and the floors were tiled in black, in keeping with the ship's colors. The overheads were a mass of white-painted cable bundles and ventilation ducting. The only break from the white and black was the red non-skid patches on the deck beneath the emergency atmosphere system manifolds in the overhead, the red crosses of first aid kits located periodically along the corridors, and the markings for various damage control gear, hull patch kits, fire extinguishers, fire hoses, or other bits of ship-saving gear located seemingly everywhere on board, which were also painted in red. And this airtight door. It was gray, while the rest of the bulkhead was white, and fitted with a small, transparent window at eye height for an average crew member, for folks to see and perhaps communicate with people on the other side of the door before just opening it willy-nilly. If the other side were decompressed, that would potentially be very, very bad. The other marking on the door was a red Z enclosed in a red circle. That same Z was on the outboard bulkhead adjacent to the door's control panel, signifying that this door was to be shut when the ship went to condition Zebra, the condition of highest airtight integrity possible in preparation for battle. If the 1MC and the alarm in the middle of breakfast had hinted that this was no drill before, actually setting Zebra solidified it now. Not that the ship hadn't gone to Zebra many times before since he checked aboard, it had, but always for drills, and only once for a real operation, and that hadn't been a combat circumstance. Travis pursed his lips as he came to a halt in front of the door, breathing in quick, short breaths in time with his accelerated heart rate, and pretended that the ever-present semi-sour boat smell in the air that came from the atmosphere processors really had faded into the background, like it usually did after a couple days underway. It did, except when the stress level on board began to mount. Then he smelled it plainly, as plain as his former girlfriend had the day he brought a sea bag full of his dirty boat clothes over the day after a 2-month underway. She claimed that wasn't why she was now his ex. Travis wasn't so sure. Regardless, just because the door was to be closed into condition zebra didn't mean he couldn't pass through, it just made the passage annoying, and take longer than it should have. Maybe don't wait so long to get up before heading to battle stations, the back part of his mind said. The part that didn't like eggs, apparently. He told that part to shut the hell up and tapped the door's control panel, then waited. In condition zebra, the chief of the watch had to approve opening of any airtight doors. Normally, this wasn't an issue. Just wave the camera above the door combing and wait a few seconds, and the chief would give permission to open it. But now, with everyone moving around the ship and the various airtight doors being shut piecemeal as folks got to station and set zebra, it took a while. Not all that long, really, maybe 15 or 20 seconds, but it felt like forever. Travis could picture Chief Amador, that was the chief of the watch at the moment, assuming he hadn't been relieved by Senior Chief Davidson, the battle station's chief of the watch, rolling his eyes as he saw Travis waiting to pass through. Chief Amador had wagged his finger in Travis's face a number of times about getting to his action station faster. He was the weapons department leading chief, and so he kind of had to, but it always struck Travis as a bit funny, though he never told the chief that. The airtight door whisked upward in front of him, and Travis spared a grin and a half salute to the overhead camera and Chief Amador. Then he hurried through to the ladder well leading down just beyond, on the inboard side of the passageway. 2 flights later put him on the second deck, the lowest accessible portion of the ship, and he turned forward. All the airtight doors leading in that direction were closed, and he had to wait at 4 separate junctions until he passed the port side boat deck and the midships and thwartships passageway, until he finally turned to starboard and stopped before the airtight hatch to his destination, the torpedo room. Unlike the airtight doors in the passageway, this hatch was completely manually operated, with a large handwheel mounted in the middle of the hatch. A differential pressure gauge off to the right showed that the torpedo room and the passageway were equalized, so Travis wasted no time in spinning the wheel until it stopped with the hatch's securing lugs well off their seating surfaces. Then he lifted the hatch's handle actuator and pushed it open. It swung freely, making the softest of squeaks against its hinges. But even hearing that made Travis wince inwardly. Someone from Deck Division was going to have a lot of fun greasing those hinges after TMC Bradley noted it down in the material discrepancy log. That thought came to a halt when he rose on the far side of the hatch and saw Bradley's red-bearded face scowling at him from the starboard rear side of the room, where the weapons handling supervisor's station was located. Like Travis, Bradley had the silver crossed sabers over a starburst that marked a fully qualified enlisted stellar warfare operator above his left breast, and the triple bombs overtop an explosion of a torpedoman's mate on his left sleeve. However, Bradley had the golden twined anchors of a chief petty officer on his collars, whereas Travis just had 2 chevrons of a second-class petty officer. So he couldn't just smile and joke at the chief when he said, "Nice of you to join us, Compton," as Travis closed the hatch behind himself and spun the hand wheel to dog the lugs. Instead, Travis just shrugged and said, "Sorry, Chief," then he headed down toward his station. The torpedo room was small compared with those on some ships. Travis had trained in the mock-up of a room on the Wallens-class cruiser. That had 2 rooms with 6 tubes each on opposite sides of the ship, and stows for 18 weapons in each room. Whitley was a Potter-class frigate and meant for patrol duty, not action on the line of battle, so her torpedo room only boasted 2 tubes and a trio of stows holding 6 weapons total, 2 on the port and starboard stows and 2 amidships. Not exactly a king's arsenal. But then, considering the payload each torpedo carried, Travis considered that it wasn't to be scoffed at either, especially when considering that most of the opponents a frigate would be sent up against consisted of merchantmen that needed inspecting or minor warships, not cruisers or ships of the line. So Whitley's armament was more than sufficient for her intended tasking, or at least that's what the book said. But now, as he slid up next to TM1 Hendricks, a dark-skinned fellow from Caraway's world, who looked like he needed a shave maybe once a month, despite being 5 years older than him, Travis considered that the books weren't always right. Hell, they were often wrong. What was the situation? Why had they been called to battle stations? Hendricks nodded at him as he slid into place and gestured toward the indicator panel beside the closed breech door for the port side torpedo tube, Tube 2. The indicator was red in its center, showing it was loaded, but Travis blinked when he saw that the outer area of the indicator was red as well. Normally, even when a torpedo, or hammerhead, as the tactical dorks in CIC like to call them, was loaded, the outer area of the indication remained green, meaning that the tube was powered down and the weapon safed. But red upon red meant that the weapon was spun up the tube ready to fire in all respects. Travis felt his eyebrows rising on his forehead. He looked over toward Tube 1, and saw that indication, read the same. Jesus, he said, and Hendricks nodded silent agreement. Do you know what's... The ship lurched suddenly below Travis's feet, and he felt himself hurled to port. He struck the heavy metal of the outboard weapon stow and felt the breath leaving his lungs even before he could add "what the fuck" to his question. A moment later, a loud tritone sounded in the room, and over Travis's implants. Then the ship shuddered again, but in a rhythm and accompanied by a noise Travis knew almost as well as he knew the sound of his own heartbeat. It was the sound of the tube launching systems powering up and then discharging, sending the tube's contents outside of the body of the ship at almost 100 G's acceleration, far faster than any manned craft in the ICN could obtain. As a shudder swept through the room, the indication on Tube 2 shifted from all red to green and then white, indicating that it was empty and safe. Travis opened his mouth to say something, but the tritone sounded again, and then in moments Tube 1 was also empty. Whatever it is, it's serious, Hendricks said. Then the chief barked out, "Reload Tubes 1 and 2 with hammerheads," in his no-nonsense command voice, which frankly wasn't all that different from his normal voice, from what Travis could detect. But Hendricks, who was older, one pay grade higher, and had years more experience than Travis did, came to attention and replied, "Aye, Chief." Then he turned to Travis and the other two members of the portside reloading party and grinned. "All right, Havoc Makers, let's do this. Reload Tube 2 with a hammerhead." Havoc Makers was Hendricks' name for his portside reloading team. Travis found it kind of silly, but both Hendricks and the Chief liked it, and so did the Weps. So it didn't really matter what Travis thought of the name, did it? Over the next 5 minutes, he and the other two people on the portside reload team struggled with positioning the heavy weapon on the rammer leading into the tube door, which had its breech open to receive the weapon. Travis even was beginning to get a sense of achievement out of his formerly unqualified and generally useless self. How had he been picked up for any ship at all, he had wondered for a while, but now he was part of a well-honed machine, a unit meant to keep his friends and allies armed all the time, or near enough as he could manage it. And with this torpedo room, the ship actually rocked, reeling over 45 degrees, or it felt like that, off of true in both pitch and yaw. And at the same time, there was a tremendous noise, so loud that people's hearing protection automatically left everyone who had it turned on reeling, but also confused by the sudden silence, as their implants turned all sound input off. A moment later, Travis felt a rush of wind, stronger than anything he had ever felt, so strong it threatened to tug him off his feet. He grabbed hold of the weapon stow he was standing next to as he felt his feet leaving the deck, and it was all he could do to hold on against that tugging. What was... Travis looked down toward his nearly horizontal feet and blanched. Tube 2's breech was still closed, but it might as well not have been. The bulkhead past it was ripped asunder, and there was a large slice of the ship totally ripped open to space. Travis needed to get the hood out from the collar of his uniform, pull the hood over his head and seal it, along with his gloves, and plug into an EAS manifold. He needed to do it in the next several seconds, or he was dead. But he felt that need like it was someone else's problem. Heard the hurricane like it was in a movie, not real life. The trembling in his arms from the exertion of holding himself was real, but as the seconds passed, it seemed to fade. And then vision began to fade as well, and he realized what was happening. Hypoxia. The beginnings of blackout from lack of oxygen. He needed to get to that manifold. He could see it, maybe 3 or 4 meters away, but now there was nothing to breathe anyway, and regardless, he had no strength. As his vision faded completely, the last thing he saw was that manifold, in the air so close at hand, and yet so eternally far. Alright, not the happiest of endings on this one. They can't all be happy. But that's sort of risk you face sometimes. I'll ask for poor Travis, and not turning out well for him. Hopefully his other guys in the torpedo room are able to get hooded up and get their plugged into the manifolds. We'll see. Don't know what happened to the rest of the ship yet, do we? We'll have to see if we can check back in on the Whitley at some point. But not today. Today we're done. And I hope you liked it. If you did, or even if you didn't, you're like, man, that was depressing. I don't like hearing the bad things happen to the ship at the end. I agree. But maybe next week will be different. What is next week? Next week is a story called Fenrir's Gambit, which I don't remember what that is. Let me take a look at it. Oh yeah, this is a fantasy crime story. So I I did a writing workshop last year where I learning about how to write capers set in a fantasy setting, and this story kind of came out of that after the fact because I ended up writing the 2 caper stories. One of them, I liked them both, but one of them I liked a whole lot. And I wrote some follow-on stories based on the characters that were in that, or based on some events that happened in that one, and this is one of those stories. So you will like it because it's fantasy, and it's crime, and it's fun. And, you know, it's me. So that is what we're doing next week on Story Saturday. Next week, during the week, we will be covering some music stuff because that's what I'm doing lately. We'll be covering a couple songs. We may or may not continue this album. I think we'll probably go on to some other stuff that people have recommended, and or stuff that I know that I wanted to look at but haven't yet from stuff that has come up. And we'll see. And of course, we'll be doing video gaming because I like doing that, and I need an excuse, and the excuse to get back to all the video games that I started and haven't finished over the years is this. I can say, hey, I'm doing the YouTube thing and the Rumble thing to promote my writing. Therefore, video gaming on that channel is business. That's the excuse I'm using. And maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't. Hey, look, my doggy's bothering me again. My doggy likes bothering me while I'm recording. Anyway, she's a sweetheart. Anyway, so we do that Sunday nights and sometimes in the middle of the week too. And of course, Story Saturday next week. So lots going on, and hopefully you'll come back and join us. Until then, you should go buy books. You should go read books. Obviously my books, but books in general. The book that today's story came from here. You can get that from michaelkingswood.com/store. You can also go to michaelkingswood.com/books to read the number 2, and you can go and pick from all the various retailers where you can find them, like Amazon or iBooks or what have you. And then, read to your heart's delight. That way, you get fun, I get cash, everybody's happy. Other way, if you want to support the channel, others, and what I'm doing and my writing stuff, don't necessarily want to buy books, but you do enjoy listening to the stories being read, you can go over to one of 2 places. You can go to Subscribestar. We got a Subscribestar thing going on there. A few bucks a month to help keep the lights on. Or you can go over to Substack, where not only do we link to these videos, but also you will be able to read the text of the story. And if you become a paid subscriber there, and you can send some money my way to help out that way too, if you wish to support the writing endeavor and keep the lights on around here while I play with puppies and read stories and listen to music. Sorry, I'm being distracted. I'm going to stop being distracted now and get about business. Hopefully you like this and turn back in the next thing we do. Until then, don't do anything I wouldn't do.